Welcome to Windows on the World, bringing you cutting-edge news, empowering information, and no conspiracy theories. On tonight's show... David Howard, welcome back to Windows on the World.
Hello, Mark. Yes.
Hi, well, you've been a contributor to the show before. We've talked about Agenda 21, and today we're going into how government really works, and you've got some very interesting points to make. So, David Howard, over to you.
Right, okay. Well, people think that the government work for them, which they do technically, but in fact, in the last sort of 20 years or so, I have seen it began as coincidences. Why is this government in this country doing the same thing as another government in another country and another one, and why do they have similar policies for the same problems all around the world? I think the word is Keynesian economics is the biggest giveaway. And then you get Labour, Liberals and Conservative all doing very similar things, even without the EU. So I thought about this and I started looking at all the different policies and began to realise that there was something wrong. Now, just to give a quick introduction, the government work for us. So they're not our masters and they're not our rulers, they are actually our servants. So if they're doing things which people don't like and aren't good for us, then it means that there's something wrong with them and we need to kick them out. And of course, with this latest 5-year plan of keeping the government in for 5 years, what on earth can we do if they bring in suddenly a really awful policy and nobody likes it? How are we supposed to get rid of them? I mean, apparently even these votes of no confidence are going to have problems, and a weak coalition or a minority government would be able to last for 5 years even if there was no confidence in them. So these are clues, these are just little clues of the much bigger picture. So I will just give a little qualification first to say that all politicians are not awful, bad, terrible people. Quite the opposite. Most of them are very decent, honest people who come in and do a very good job for their constituencies. I don't want to have a go at all the individuals. It's not about the individuals. It's about the people at the top who actually make the rules. So, you know, we're talking about cabinets and ministers and governments and people even ruling the governments here, like George Soros and the Rockefeller Foundation, because the Bilderbergers meet and the Club of Rome meet and the Council for Foreign Relations and the Trilateral Commission, they all exist and you can see who's on them. Now, the Club of Rome actually admit, they don't just admit, but they publish all their findings. So at least you've got one picture of what is going on absolutely openly, and you can read it all free online. So the Club of Rome is a very good place to start if you want to see confirmation of this, because, you know, apart from picking up different clues, a lot of this is very much confirmed and double corroborated and everything else. So to show that I'm not just using my own opinions and making it up. So what happens is that you'll get these very decent, honest politicians and a few dodgy ones who have been co-opted separately. And they come in, you know, like many police as well. It's not so bad in the police, but I've heard stories about that. But it's a similar thing that they come in and they want to do well. And then after 2 or 3 days, I've heard 3 or 4 stories directly from MPs who have said this on the quiet. They get a little tap on the shoulder from one of the whips when they come into Parliament after a week or so and say, would you like to do this, that or the other? So, oh my, wow, yes, definitely. When you can't vote for this, you can't go for that. So all their personal principles are out the window or put on the line within a week. And they've got to decide. And unfortunately, when it comes to the career, just like with the climate scientists, do they do the right thing or do they follow what they're told to do? And unfortunately, enough of them follow what they're told to do and go along with the masses to become very successful and to get a huge pension and very good speaking fees after they've retired. So basically, what I've got here is a list of 6 different things that are being carried out, certainly in Britain and in most of the world, where you can see that the government are pretty much ruining what you would call the utilitarian principle. The utilitarian principle by Jeremy Bentham is a very basic form of government where you're saying that the greatest good for the greatest number of people. So if you look at the economics here, just to start with the economic figures, so the first thing that the government have done since 2008 is to have world record interest rates of 0.5%. They've got negative interest rates in the EU now, which actually means that people who are governed by them are losing money at the rate of 0.1% a year. So they're paying the banks to keep the money. And people think, oh, wow, see, this is all about making something look good on the surface, where underneath you've got a nest of vipers. And you lift up the lid and you look, oh, my God, it's horrible. And what I want people to know is that these policies are all absolutely horrible. They are hurting everyone, because the only people that do well out of low interest rates are banks and investment companies. The banks do it well because they borrow at 0.5%. Do you know anyone in this current situation who's borrowing at 0.5%? You know, it's a joke, 0.5%. This is only a privileged, less than 1% of the world are borrowing at base rate. Everyone else is borrowing at 10%, 15%, 1,000%. So, you know, they don't really exist. The only direct thing which is linked to low interest rates are mortgage rates. Now, mortgage rates are maybe 3 to 4+%, depending on what sort of credit risk you are. But the thing about your mortgage rate is it's a con, because your mortgage rate is based on how much you can pay a month. So what happens is that the estate agent works out how much you as an individual are going to pay a month. And if the mortgage rate is low, guess what? They put the price of the house up. And this has created rampant house inflation around the world. So all that happens is that your asset costs a lot more and the interest on it is low. And if the interest rates go up, of course, you've got an asset where you're paying far more money out than you were originally. And a lot of people aren't clever enough to allow for that and get caught. But the killer here is that 60 to 70% of people, because it includes pensioners, are net savers and not net borrowers. So taking the utilitarian principle, 20 to 30% of ordinary citizens, forget the bankers and the investment companies, are benefiting temporarily from the low interest rates, and everyone else is suffering. So all the people who are losing money in their investments haven't got the money to put in the economy shrinks, and guess what they do? They buy property because it's the only thing that's going up, and it puts the price of property up for the people who actually have to live in it. So pretty much everything about low interest rates hurts people, whichever way you look at it. Now, this is also connected to inflation, because there's this old belief, which is called creative accounting. It's creating an illusion. It's smoke and mirrors. If you've got inflation, you can inflate your way out of a debt, which is true up to a point, but all you do is you pay later on. So the second point is that the government are deliberately, I mean, I was amazed when I saw this, because I studied economics just at A level and a little bit in my degree, that inflation is pernicious. Now, in the old days, debasing currency was part of treason, which was actually one of the only things you could get the death sentence for. So when you couldn't get the death sentence for murder in Britain, you could still get it for attacking the Queen and for treason. So they really thought debasing the currency was serious. So when you have an inflation target of 2%, that means that the government are doing everything they possibly can to make inflation at 2% a year. So if you have £1,000 in the bank, in your current account, which earns no interest, technically that means it will be worth 2% less at the end of each year, just by government alone. And if your interest rates in the bank are 2%, which they are now roughly, all you're doing is keeping up with inflation. You aren't making a profit. So, you know, these are government and Bank of England policies. Why would they want to do that? Because the low interest rates help the banks, because they borrow at this incredibly low rate. They do overnight deals where you make something like 0.8% on £1,000 million, or some number they get out of a hat. And then when they sell, they borrowed it overnight at 0.5%, made 0.8% profit, which could be millions, and they couldn't do it. If interest rates went above 1 or 2%, they'd never be able to do these overnighters. So that's another reason. There are very good reasons for it. So deliberately creating inflation hurts everybody, because even the people with a mortgage, all that happens, all the money that is taken out of mortgage payments goes on house prices. So the day that you want to sell your house, if that house does not, is not one that you, is one that you live in, if you're living in the house, you will never benefit from rising house prices. It's physically impossible, because as soon as you sell your house, everything else you buy will have gone up by the same amount. And with low interest rates and inflation, you will lose every time, because all you're doing is you're waiting for that day when you sell, when you're going to have to spend all that money you've saved. It's all going to go on another purchase. So basically, that is the second thing, and they're tied up together: low interest rates and the deliberately creating inflation. And they say deflation will be a terrible thing. Why would deflation be a terrible thing? Because, I mean, it's probably ideal to have stable inflation. That is zero inflation either way, because then you know exactly where you're coming from. But if you have deflation, that means that the money you've got is going to buy more. Now, whoever thought that was a bad thing? Because it's a correction in the market. If the house price, for example, the house prices round here, a 4-bedroom house now will cost you £1 million. Now, who's going to be able to buy that? So, of course, if house price, which is the biggest thing in your life and the most of your money goes down, you'll have loads more money for other things. The economy will bounce back, and everyone will be happy. You know, this is simplifying things, because some of these things really are simple cause and effect. Because the largest part of anybody's outgoings is what they're paying for their house. So you reduce that, you've got more money left over. Now, I'll just quickly pop something else in so that people can use their own personal economic indicator, because I went through all the economic indicators, the inflation and the growth that the governments give you, and I realised it was nonsense, because growth is meaningless because it's uneven and it doesn't apply generally, and also they fiddle with it. So I wouldn't say growth is a very good means of judging anything. Inflation is only a secondary indicator, so it's like somebody's temperature rather than their health. There is one thing which is the clearest and most direct indicator of the economics, that is your purchasing power. So basically, I'll give you an example. When China overtook Britain as a larger economy, it was meaningless, because the purchasing power of the average Chinaman was a seventh of what it was here. I mean, it's growing now, but ours has been going down since 2007. So you will ask yourself, given low interest rates and creating inflation, they're also reducing the actual things by not putting house prices in inflation, otherwise it would be a lot more. Our purchasing power has gone down because the price inflation, which is the really important one, has been creeping up and up and up, and the wages have been below it. So not only have people's savings been eroded, but so has their wages been eroded. So it doesn't matter how much money, where you're getting your money from, you're losing on it. And the government is in charge of this. Which government would do this? America has got the same policies. The EU has got the same policies. Britain's got the same policies. Quantitative easing is debasing the currency because it's pumping artificial money, and it's purely a Ponzi scheme, pulling in the same money from the left, giving it to the right and saying we've got twice as much money now. But the actual capital, the amount of assets in the system, is not going up. It's staying exactly the same. So that's the real growth, is the capital. It's the gold standard, which we don't have. If you were to base the currency on gold or any other assets, at least you would know, because if you have one banana worth £1 and you say, all right, we're going to put £2 in the economy, the bananas will not be worth any more because you'll still have the same amount of bananas, so you'll be paying twice as much. You have to have 2 bananas and £1, then everyone's happy because the capital, the actual assets are increasing and the money supply is the same. And that's called real growth, and we're not getting that. Now, the third one is the high income tax formula, because there's a very simple economic test which they've done many, many times, and I'll give credit because you can always name names when they're heroes, when they're decent people. David Davis, who is one of the best politicians we've got in government at the moment, I've been following him for many years, was on an interview, and he says that the government have had survey after survey for decades going back that if you tax people over 50% or even 40%, the total revenue goes down. And that's very simple, because if people are working and they're not getting anything back for it, they will work less, they will go elsewhere to countries where the tax is lower, or they'll cheat. So Francois Hollande, who's got 75% tax, is hurting everybody because nobody's benefiting at all. Because, you know, people are creeping out of France and going abroad, and loads of them are coming to London because they don't want to pay that much tax. The popularity rating of him has gone down to 9%, and the French economy is going down the toilet. And this is all totally predictable. And if you say, as a politician, I'm going to come in as a politician and punish the people who are doing the most, because you've got two things that you have to say about the rich people. Either they are earning it honestly or they're cheating. If they're cheating, get the police, sort them out and deal with them. And if they're not cheating, it's their money, they've worked for it. Whatever they've done, they've got the talent, they're earning the money, they deserve it. Let them keep it. It belongs to them. Okay, take as much from them as you need to keep the economy going, but don't take more than you need to, and never take so much as just to punish them for doing well, because they might only be a few percent of the population, but they've got a bit more power and they will turn against you, or they'll just leave.
It's very true, David. We're going to take a short break now. These are the basics of economy that everybody should know. So we'll see you in a couple of minutes.
Thanks.
Welcome to Windows on the World with me, Mark Windows. Reports of your death were greatly exaggerated then.
As soon as I was going out the door, she says, "All right, Johnny Delirious, you go outside that door, you're a dead man."
Is it a bit of a change from Richard and Judy for you?
I've come home.
In your opinion, do you think the jury was led?
It's not mine to say.
Very diplomatic. Tell the viewers a bit about what happened to you.
Well, they bribed 3 criminals to come in and give hearsay.
If a bomb went off in London and took 92 lives, yeah, would you want to be on the payroll of that?
It's all based on models and projections.
It's all over, bother shouting.
In order to get me in prison, they probably broke, a couple dozen laws.
Free Yolanda. Y'all planted drugs on Yolanda, and we're going to get her released and get the crooked cops busted.
That gave all the officers time for their adrenaline to slow down so we wouldn't get shot.
Just for the viewers out there who may not know about this story, when did you discover this pyramid?
In April of 2005, I first came to little Bosnian town of Visoko.
When you drive someone to take their own life, like the CSA have done, I mean, that's an abomination.
Thanks for being on Windows on the World.
Peace to London.
The rest is history, and everybody called me Delirious after that.
David Howard, welcome back to Windows on the World. We're talking about how the economy and government really works. Carry on. I think we're up to point 4 now.
We're up to point 4. Yeah, there are only 6, because basically, I think once you get this general picture, people will be able to work it out for themselves. Because what I really want to do is to break the illusion that the government are really killing themselves and bending over backwards and spending months in meetings trying to help people and sort out the economy. Because just one thing that I'll slip in from a later point, just to make the point, is that the banks have not really had an awful lot of reform since they caused the world economic crash. Now, that is something which is, Max Kaiser points out. I learn a lot from his economics, so credit where it's due. And the thing is that if you've got, you start off with the system where you join in America and in Britain the investment and the clearing banks. So what they are actually doing is they are spending our deposits on gambling. There's something dodgy about that. Now, that was mainly the cause of the problems, and also about lending, that if you lend more than a certain amount, it's leverage ratios. If you're lending more than a few times, I think we used to do 7 in economics, 7 times the amount of capital that you've got invested, it's extremely dangerous. If more than that amount of people want to withdraw the money, they won't have it, because all that money is being invested in other things. And if you call in a debt and that money has been lent out a second time on a second mortgage, so to speak, you've had it. Where's that money going to come from? So they've set themselves up for disaster. These are knowns, because this is what caused the world economic crash, and they haven't changed it. So this is related to one of the other points, but it's just a spin-off thing, because it's another example that if they really wanted to help us, they would have fixed all the laws and put the banks back to where they were in the 1970s. All the things that Margaret Thatcher did with the deregulating the market, the big bang, all that would have been changed, because they all know what caused the problem, and that caused it. So why have we kept it in? Okay, so the next one is the Common Agricultural Policy. Now, people remember the butter mountains and the wine lakes from the 70s. These were going on before we joined the common market, as it was then. Now, butter mountains and wine lakes Why would they say, oh, goodness me, people thought, well, the common agricultural policy, look how successful it is. We are producing so much stuff that we've got it all in storage. No, it wasn't like that. It's like low interest rates. They're fooling you. What they're actually doing is incredibly simple. It's what the Russians did with the wheat market when they closed the wheat market, which I think is illegal to close the market from the world because there's world trade laws and treaties and things. These butter mountains and wine lakes were holding stuff back. So what they were actually doing is they were saying, like with oil, they've done the same with oil by keeping oil tankers offshore until the price went up. We are going to manipulate our market. We're going to cause food shortages and rationing, and that will put the price up. So they were taking basic economics of supply and demand. If you reduce the supply, the demand will be the same and the price will go up. So they were actually getting essentials. Now this is another thing about how you can tell that a government is against you is that they make the price of essentials go up. And they tax essentials, or they, one way or the other, they make them harder to get, because if you can't have water easily, they privatise the water companies. If you can't have energy easily, they put huge taxes, supposedly in the name of the planet, my backside, on fuel and energy and everything else. And all these extra taxes make your living and my living incredibly hard. And who are they hardest for? The poor people. So the common agricultural policy is the fruit of the European Union or the common market, that they are holding back the most essential thing for life. If they could ration the air and hold back the air, they'd do that as well. Maybe they'll find a way of doing that. They're certainly taxing us for it now. And, would a common market that were really built up of people trying to help each other and look after each other, basically blackmail the entire 12 countries or however many we were in 1971 for the sake of a few farmers? Because that's what they were doing. They were bribing the farmers, and they were using as a hostage the human beings who needed to eat and drink and keeping their stuff back. So that is the fourth policy. And basically anyone that can do that, would you trust them to look after your children? I do not think so. Now the next one is quite amazing, because your favourite phrase and mine, which I agree with, this is not a conspiracy theory, is quite true. There is, in law, which is my subject, a conspiracy is two or more people agreeing to break the law. And it's that simple. And if you can prove that two or more people have agreed to break the law, you have conspiracy. And the fascinating thing, again, like treason, is that if you are accused of conspiring to commit a crime, the penalty is greater than committing the crime itself sometimes. So they obviously think that something premeditated is so heinous that it's worse than somebody going out and doing something as an opportunist. So, these are quite important because they're very long held in legal principles. So something which has been a conspiracy theory for as long as I can remember, and I'm sure you can remember, false flag operations. Feel free to chip in if you want to, because this is all your field. Now, I've always heard of false flag operations as rumours, so I always thought, well, it would be quite likely and quite possible for governments to cause really bad problems and offer the solution. But I don't think 9/11 or 7/7 or any of these bombings have been government committed, and if they were, they could cover them up so well. It'd be very hard to investigate. So, about few months ago, again, Max Kaiser mentioned Operation Northwards. Now, amazingly enough, among the conspiracy nuts, the ones that come out and say everything, including Ebola, is not real. And I get terribly frustrated on the internet trying to tell the people the difference, because, the laws of evidence are incredibly clear and basic. If you have more evidence than reasonable doubt, then you can start go ahead and say it's probably conspiracy. Now, with my previous visits here, when we talked about global warming, I had confessions. The people had actually confessed this is nothing to do with the environment. This is about economic redistribution, etc., etc. So we've got confessions from the people involved. So we know it's a conspiracy. A confession is a legal document if it's done under the right circumstances. And it's definitely evidence for a jury beyond reasonable doubt. So these false flag operations I always thought were possible, but I didn't think they were necessarily real because I never had any really solid evidence on them. And then out of the blue came Max Kaiser with Operation Northwards. Now, all the conspiracy people out there, I want to make a note of this because in law, again, you have a precedent. If something can happen once, for example, it's not just in the law, it's anywhere in the world. If something could happen once, for example, when they were talking about exceeding the speed of light, if you exceed the speed of light once, you don't need a few more examples just to check, because if that really did do it, that is a proof that you can go faster than the speed of light and it's not a constant. So this is a precedent which it's like putting a price on something where, you know, plastic bags are free, now they're going to be 5p. That's a precedent. All plastic bags will be charged for another example of opening a door which can be open and pulled open and 10p and then 100p and everything else. So you set a precedent. Operation Northwards was in 1963 when America was trying to bring down Fidel Castro in Cuba. Now, the interesting thing is that because it took so long, of course, because it was top secret, was it 50 years or something, whenever it was, the secrecy law expired on it. So Operation Northwards is now public domain, and it was absolutely clear that they had a plan from the CIA to frame Cuba for attacking US citizens and basically threatening them with war. How were they going to do this, you wonder? Well, they actually planned to carry out fake attacks on the American people using their own CIA agents to attack and kill totally innocent people and then blame it on Cuba and get the people ready for a war. Now, they couldn't do this without presidential approval, so they took the things to President 1963, who was, in fact, Mr. Kennedy. He rejected it because he was a decent person. He was going to, I think, bring back all sorts of reforms to the American economy. So it's very coincidental that very shortly after this happened, he was assassinated.
Yes,
so,
I'm sure that's just a conspiracy theory, David. I really don't think that had anything to do with it, as we know.
Yeah. But what a coincidence, eh?
What a coincidence. Well, yes, all we have to look at with all of this stuff is who actually benefits. When we're talking about this agenda that's being played out, we're seeing it more and more, and we've discussed this on the show, but this is fascinating, so carry on.
Okay, yeah. So basically, if America has set the precedent, America is prepared to kill its own citizens to get them to start a war against Cuba and accept it. It can happen at the highest possible level. Now, you know, God forbid had Kennedy not been Kennedy and been one of the others, said, all right, go ahead. And this came out afterwards. Can you imagine what would happen if instead of just being a piece of paper suggesting this, that they would say, my God, the 1963 Cuba War, which happened in a different dimension in time and space, but, you know, had happened in that theory, had all been a false flag. I think a lot more people would have become totally, you know, you get these moments. Alex Jones says that inertia and complacency is basically the fuel that allows bad government. And what happens is you get these moments where most people will hear something and say, oh, that's terrible. What's on telly? So, you know, that's been and gone. That moment has passed. So you need either to repeat it over and over again, which is laborious, but it will work. If you keep impressing this stuff on people enough, the third, fourth, fifth time, it will sink in and they'll start to wake up. It's like the difference between having an alarm clock and having some sort of subliminal tape, which eventually will get you woken up. But what I reckon is that you get these major pieces of news, these major events, which are so big, people will not be able to let them pass. They'll say, my God, that is absolutely terrible. Now, you know, just a slight tangent, but it's very important because I was reading psychological methods of waking people up because it's based on cults, because a cult will use all the same methods that the governments use, and we have to use the same methods on individuals. And it's incredibly slow, and it's far too slow to work on more than a handful of people because the chain reaction takes years if you're doing it this way. But it does work. It's face-to-face individual work. So I've had in the last few months 3 or 4 people that I've known and worked with face to face say, thank God, you know, I've learned so much from you because it's been an ongoing process. I haven't just sat down on the internet, written something and they've read it and said, oh my God, what's on telly and, you know, what's for dinner and everything else and completely forgotten about it. But it's been a nice process. I see it a bit like shoelaces, that where a kid makes a real mess of their shoelaces and you can't undo them. I sit there and unpick them gradually apart until eventually the shoelaces are nice and free and they can be used properly. And that's what I do with people's minds, that I undo the knots that life has created. We're all born completely clear and open and everything's working well, but people throughout their lives, they get these little knots and they need to be untied. But these sort of things will untie the knots suddenly if enough people hear it. So, you know, for example, with your video with me last night, I said to you afterwards that if that had been on Channel 4, there would be a revolution. You know, people would be going to the UN building in America and demonstrating outside it and who knows what, because some of the information that we have is killer information that either, you know, people just overlook it, or it only gets to, you know, hundreds or thousands of people. Because I learned years ago from general sort of media things that there is a tipping point, there is a threshold, I think, of maybe 1 million people. If 1 million people at once, you know, simultaneously will see the same program, it will wake them up. So, for instance, when Channel 4 had the great global warming swindle, you know, that woke up a hell of a lot of people who were completely on the fence before, because they all saw it in one go. The evidence was blooming good evidence, and they thought, right, you know, we'll be woken up. I no longer trust the people on global warming. And this is the sort of event I want to see over and over and over again. I want people to get shocked, totally shocked out of their complacency. Because I think they say if there's 10 or 20% of the people wake up, that's all you need, because the other people don't matter, because most of them are passive. They're just, you know, they're on the sidelines and they don't do very much.
I'd probably say, David, that it's less than that. I mean, I think 3 or 4% of people, if they are actually applying themselves properly, can do an enormous amount, because what we have now is consensus brought in by change agents at every single level, and that goes for the government as well. People who think that Nick Clegg and David Cameron run the country, they must be joking. They run nothing. These people are there, they're instructed, they read off an auto cue. And when we're talking about local government, this is where it's being implemented. For instance, what we were talking about in the mini Holland scheme, they've recruited all these cyclists and saying it's all about cycling. No, it's nothing to do with cycling. It's about closing off large areas and stopping people using private transport. That's all it is. And it's in the documents, and the evidence is there, because when you explain it to people and say, well, what's this got to do with cycling? There's cycling lanes everywhere. All they'd need is 2 ways through that particular area, north, south, east, west for cycles. They've already got that. The pathways are already there with the cycling signs on. So why are they closing all the main routes? Now, this is very, very obvious, but we're living in a consensus-led society, which means that people believe that they're being asked their opinion, and that opinion is being translated. But more and more we're finding it's not, because especially with local government, when there is actually a public debate on something, it's run by change agents and facilitators, and there is no debate. And even if there is, then they are not listened to, and these people are just spouting change. They're not telling you what the change is, because nobody would want it. And this is what people need to wake up to. But I don't think it takes that many people. I really don't, because if you're focused on what you want to do and get that message out to the right people, as you say, I mean, the people who sit in front of the television and watch mindless TV shows, you know, banal entertainment, their minds are not any use really, because their minds have been numbed. But there's a certain amount of the population always going to be like that. But what they want is the whole population to be like that. While there's people like us, I think there might be some hope. We're going to take another short break, and we'll see you in a couple of minutes.
We have in the studio David Compan, NHS electrician just released after being sectioned under the Mental Health Act. If you weren't with anybody, you'd have just disappeared. Nobody would know where you are, and you can be detained indefinitely.
That's right. Thank you very much for all your support. Thank you very much.
Thanks, David. Our next guest, Nazrin, was evicted from her own property. This was due to a management company issuing charges which she disputed.
The lady called for assistance from the police, and she's now been arrested, handcuffed, took out of her own home.
The student loans, the debt book has been sold. All of what we've talked about is coming your way.
Sergeant?
Have a seat. I don't actually necessarily go into a police station at this time.
What has she been arrested for?
Well, that video was very shocking because Nasrin was actually peacefully occupying her own property and she was arrested for breach of the peace in her own house.
It's very painful to watch because in that instance I realised something terrible is happening in this country.
We did a show about people getting their doors kicked in by the police on behalf of private interests without proper court warrants, and this is actual fact. This is happening.
It's illegal and it's corrupt. And you have to ask yourself, why the people who are willing to bust in people's doors, what the hell happened to them?
You actually called me as they were smashing the door down. Yeah. We actually got a phone call into their press office, and first of all they said the police would never do that. However, they've been caught on video doing just that. The second time we called, they said if the police did that, it would be criminal damage. So you've just witnessed criminal damage by the police.
David Howard, welcome back to Windows on the World. Fascinating dialogue as always. And we're going to carry on now with your last point, point 6, and your summary. So carry on.
Okay, right. Now, I won't keep pressing on my legal qualifications, but just to remind people that I am very sensitive to legal issues because that's my field. Now, when I've exposed something, you know, a conspiracy, a real conspiracy where there's been evidence, but it hasn't been yet hit the media, there's this huge delay between, you know, I can smell something wrong. The fish is obviously off. There is fish. I can smell it. You can't have the smell of bad fish without a dead fish rotting somewhere. And the government and the media tracing it, finding the fish and naming it and saying how it happened and why it's there. So what's fascinating is the delay. Now, a delay means that if you give a criminal an amount of time to run, they can be in Brazil within a day or two. Now, what happens if you give a criminal 10 years or 20 years? What can they do then? They can carry on with their life. They can carry on dealing the drugs, doing whatever they are doing. And by the time that the law catches up with them, they might be dead. So, you know, if you give people decades instead of days to run away, you are going to end up hurting the people and allowing the criminals who, the ones I'm going to mention, have been working worldwide and they have completely manipulated. If you imagine the world economy as a puppet and you're pulling the strings and saying, right, we're going to pull inflation this way, we're going to pull interest rates that way. Most people assume that the economy and war and other things connected to it are spontaneous. You know, we wake up one day and, oh my God, the stock market's gone down by 5%. Oh, what a disaster. If only they could have predicted it. Well, what I normally find is that it's all scripted. You know, Bilderberg meeting, crash the stock market on a certain day and then bring it up. Because the whole point is with crashing the stock market. What happens if you crash the stock market? It's incredibly basic. You have two things going on with stock markets. You have transactions and you have buys and sells. Now, the transactions are carried out by the stockbrokers themselves. Now, if you're a betting man, if you're a middleman taking commission on a bet or anything else, you're not the person at the other end of it who's winning or losing. All you're doing is you're taking money from the first person, holding it and giving it to the second person. Now, I'll give you the original example, which was tied up to the economy crash in 2007, so you'll get the context of the whole thing, because all of this is what I call the big picture. It's all tied up together. What I do is every time there's a news item, I will tie it into the big picture. So nothing is isolated. Everything works together, because this puppet, you pull one bit, it's a spider's web, and another bit will move because it's all interconnected. So you start off with loans. So what happens is in the real world, i.e. the world of the economics books, if I'm a bank and I lend somebody money for a mortgage, they will pay it off and I'll make my profit and it'll be honest. That's how a proper mortgage is supposed to be. That a building society, not even a bank, because it was building societies then, people will buy a house, and the money for that house will come from people who have already bought houses and retired, and they're investing their money, and you lend that money out to the law of seven, that you don't lend out more than 7 times because it's dangerous to out leverage yourself or out borrow yourself, and everything worked perfectly. Now, back then, the average, this is your purchasing power again, the average house in the 1970s was 3 times average income, and the average, or in fact the maximum amount you were allowed to spend on a mortgage was 2.5 to 3 times your annual income, and everything worked perfectly. And just like in America, a postman could buy an average house with an average income, and that was the sign of a civilized, decent country where everyone who worked hard could have somewhere to live. Now, in 40 years, we're looking at 10 times the amount of your average income. And in London, you need to earn £100,000 to be a first-time buyer, which, of course, how many people are? So all the money's going off abroad and they're buying it over here. How is this allowed to happen? I will tell you how it's allowed to happen, because of, firstly, commission. So what is happening since the Big Bang, Margaret Thatcher's deregulation, is that we're getting loans which are used as assets. So instead of the gold standard, where I am selling you a currency which is backed up by gold, this is junk, pure junk, subprime markets. They are selling you somebody else's mortgage, which may or may not be paid back. And what happens is the people who are selling it are very clever. It's called predatory lending. They do not own anything, so they have no stake in it whatsoever. They've bought this junk as a currency, and they are selling it on to other people who don't understand what's in it, and they're making commission. So for loans and for stocks and shares, the first of the 2 elements of the stock and share market is that when you are buying or selling as a third-party middleman, you make commission every time there is a sale. So what's happening is if the stock market is falling and they're selling, you get your commission. If it's rising, you get your commission. But if it's not doing anything, you get nothing because nobody's buying or selling. So what do? You volatilize the stock market. You set things up, market manipulation. They work together. They set things up so that the stock markets are going to jump about wildly ad infinitum, and that the people who know this, they will sell when it falls down to the bottom. Sorry, they will sell when it's at the top. They will buy when it falls at the bottom. And they know perfectly well that 90% of those shares are blue chip shares that will always go up, like Marks and Spencer's and things that are based on essentials. Even funeral companies, they always do well in a recession because everyone has to die and have a funeral. So they're not affected by recessions. A lot of things aren't. So what they're doing is they're exploiting these inbuilt flaws in the stock market, making it go bouncy, bouncy, bouncy. And every time it goes down, they'll buy the stuff when it's low, knowing it'll bounce in 3 or 4 days, and they'll sell it. So it was like the privatisations of British Gas and TSB. When everyone knew it was going to bounce the next day, they all bought and they sold within 2 or 3 days and made a fortune. Now imagine this happening every week, and you'll get an idea how this happens. So you've got the people who make the commission on the loans or the things anyway, and you get the people who buy and sell on the volatile market. Now, what would you do if you really wanted to fix this well? You would say, I am going to get the betting results after the race has come in. So with LIBOR, this is my 6th example, which I had to give a huge amount of background to explain why it's absolutely incredible how it was allowed to go on for 10 or 20 years. They were fixing the interest rates on mortgages around the world, which is so easy to pick up that, I'm just giving you a theoretical point, which is from outsiders and from insiders who have said this, and the investigations are still going on. They allowed the LIBOR fixing to go on for about 10 years, which shouldn't be possible, and would only be possible if it was ordered from the top and not some rogues doing it at the bottom, because otherwise they would have been picked up ages ago. Now, that's not even the only example I've got, because after LIBOR, one by one, all these things which have been bubbling away in the background and people like me have been hearing about but didn't want to say too much about because we didn't have the evidence to make it from a conspiracy theory to a conspiracy. And then all of a sudden, 10 years later, the newspaper said they fixed LIBOR. They've been doing it for 10 years. And this is the killer here. It is not a crime. What? It is not a crime the money involved was something like eight figures of money. You know, that's one with lots and lots of zeros. That is how much they have removed from the economy in that time. It was an exact calculable amount. Now, if you and I had gone on a train and not had the money for the fare, we could have got a criminal record and a £50 fine without even the intention of doing it, because that's how they've set it up. It's very easy to prosecute people for theft. What they had done, the government are not our friends because they changed the law to make interest rate fixing a civil wrong. You couldn't be prosecuted for it under the Theft Act, which says gaining benefits from financial services, fraudulent financial services, is illegal. They exempted them from it. Why would they do that? They actually made them above the law. And you know who does that? Would you like to have a guess who else is above the law in certain places?
Well, David, I'd probably go on all day about the amount of people who are above the law, so you better tell us quick.
Well, the made man in the mafia, the man at the top, the capo di capi, the head of the heads. So the boss of the bosses in the mafia can do anything he likes, and he has protection from it. Now, this is very interesting because, firstly, not only have they fixed LIBOR and they fixed the gold, I think the gold price, and they fixed the foreign exchanges, and these are all under investigation now. They know they've done it. It's just a matter now of catching the guilty parties. But they actually made something which was fraudulent legal. So the government changed the law saying that if the bankers defraud the public, they will not be criminally liable for it. Now, talk about anti-utilitarianism. If that can happen, and they can actually openly make laws exempting bankers from the criminal law, what else can they do? You know, we've got a big precedent here. And, you know, I would just say there are certain parties in Britain that wouldn't do that. Use your own imagination, because it's not a party political broadcast, but it's none of the big three. I'll just say that. So there is an escape route. You do have, what happens is, if you've got enough dishonesty on one side, the dialectical materialism, when society becomes too extreme, you will get the opposite building up on the other side to balance it out. That's happening now. It's happening in the ballot boxes. It's happening in the opinion polls. So it's not a permanent situation. Just by knowing about it, people will not like it, and they're going to do something about it. And one way or another, we will have a decent government again. So that basically is the 6 things that are wrong. And I will give you a very basic example of how not to run a government, because they're working for us. Power is a privilege and not a right. So if you put somebody in power, they are servants. So, you know, a child will learn at a very young age not to stamp on ants because they can, because there's no penalty for it. Now, Ken Livingstone was the Mayor of London, and he set up the congestion charge because he was voted to do it on 2 promises: that he wouldn't raise the price and he wouldn't extend it. And within 4 or 5 years, he doubled the price, or more than doubled the price, and he extended it. Again, more precedents. If you pay to drive into London, do you really think the price is going to stay fixed? And do you really think the area is going to stay fixed? And he had an interview, and they said to him, Ken, you promised, you were actually elected to bring in a small and a fixed congestion charge at a certain price, and you raised it, and you also extended it. Why did you do that? Oh, because I can. Now, that is the worst possible answer, and it's such a poor answer and such a telling answer that I've called it the Ken Livingstone principle, because he's the first person to be honest enough to admit that he did something bad because there were no consequences. And that is the test. It's like really a test of your integrity. You know, if there's karma or anything like that, they will get their karma because they failed the test. They are given power to be in government, and they abuse the power. Now, abuse of trust, again, like conspiracy, is one of the greatest crimes on earth, and he abused our trust. But because the law was set up to allow him to do that, he exploited it. And, you know, also the congestion charge was supposed to be revenue neutral, i.e. it cost no more to set up than they got back in revenue. Now, when Boris Johnson, who is not part of, I don't think, the system, and he was voted back in London, I think, because people recognise that. There's something about Boris Johnson which is incredibly refreshing, and I wish him the best of luck in his career. Now, he came in, and the first thing he did, he promised he would get rid of the congestion charge if he could do it, and he did. He got rid of all the extension, but what he did do is put up the price in the remainder. And they said, well, why did you do it? And he is honest. So he said, because we couldn't afford not to. So it means that the third plank of Ken Livingstone's congestion charge was also bogus, because Ken Livingstone said that it's got to be revenue neutral. Not only did he say that, it was in the law. The regulations said that this congestion charge cannot make more money, just like parking tickets, bloody don't make more money than it costs to administer them. But when Boris Johnson wanted to get rid of it, and he would have got rid of it, he couldn't. And he had to charge a lot more because it is a cash cow. It is just there as another tax. And again, it is restricting people's freedom, and it's restricting people getting around. Now, I said it before, and I'll say it again just for the people that didn't hear it. I have a neighbour around the corner whose mother lives within the congestion charge. Now, he's got 2 children. He works very hard. And he used to leave his children with his mother during the school holidays, and he can't do it now because he can't afford the £11 or whatever it is a day to take his children into town before he goes to work. So it is having really nasty practical consequences. So, as I say, would a government that really cared about you and helped you be breaking up families in this way and stopping people from getting around? I don't think so. That's my 6 points.
It's absolutely brilliant, David. And what I would add to that, though, is I think Boris Johnson, again, is just part of this agenda for change. I think all these people are change agents, whether they know it or not. I think some of them are so deeply programmed. But the propaganda that I hear him spouting is really all that I'm hearing from these other change agents and these people who we have in government. When people do realise that we are in a consensus-led society, which means that there is one outcome and we are made to agree on it, then things might change a bit more. I think that it's a very good idea that people think that they can change things and to actually get together and really do it. However, what we're finding, and especially with my conversations between people in California, where there's Agenda 21 and the property theft and the privatization of everything on the planet is basically taking place on a massive scale, that we are finding that we are being given an illusion of some kind of participation, and that participation is just an illusion. For instance, I've got a council propaganda paper here which is put through a letterbox in Waltham Forest, and it's a picture of the leader of the council, Chris Robbins, and it says, "We need to talk. It's not about us, it's about you." See, what they're doing here is simple reversal. It means that there's policies and implementations being carried on, such as this Mini Holland scheme, which has nothing to do with cycling. It's about closing off areas of London, and also with it's being implemented by change agents who've been brought into the borough. So they are so keen to cover their tracks that they're desperate to make the public think that they're having some kind of participation in it, which of course they're not.
They always do the opposite to what they say. I mean that is a very simple thing. It's like lateral thinking. They say one thing, that it's all about you. No, it's all about us. And it's all connected. As I say, we've got this huge spider's web, this big picture, which I've hooked into and seen. And people just need to see 2 or 3 elements of it, and that's enough. They don't need to learn the whole thing. They don't need to study it for years. They just need to realise and get the point. Now, just to sum up, as I say, what I've done is the simple biblical principle of judging the tree by its fruit. Now, problem, reaction, solution. People would never accept any of these policies. If this was a party political broadcast, and I sat down as a top member of the cabinet, said we are going to give you these policies, we'd be out the door the next day. We'd all be carrying our suitcases. That all these are policies which we've got now, and people are standing outside Buckingham Palace and Parliament, demonstrating, we want more taxes, we want more taxes. Can you imagine in the past a demonstration, and a regular demonstration around the world, for people saying they want more taxes because they think that if they don't pay more money, the sky is going to fall and we're all going to melt because we're going to get slightly different weather from what we had before? I mean, we've just had this hurricane hit Bermuda. It blew through Bermuda, gave them the sort of things that people believe are going to happen in England, which they couldn't ever do in a million years. And the people in Bermuda survived and they're getting on with their business today just as they did yesterday, and they've got a few more jobs for the builders. This is what weather has always done. It will always do it. But people are so scared of the weather that they will say, you know, we'll give you more taxes. Just please stop the weather from killing us and killing our unborn grandchildren. It's total, complete paranoia and hypnotic trance that they've been put into. That they're believing absolute nonsense, and they're more scared of that than Ebola, which will wipe us all out like the plague, because, you know, they might have after the event treatment, but they've got no cure for it that they really know of. And, you know, if it was here or anywhere else, it would be a real threat. We've got people sitting online saying, oh, climate change is more dangerous than Ebola. Well, how many people has climate change ever killed? None of them. The climate kills people, but it always did. Changing it isn't going to. So, yes, the summary. These are the things which I hope that I've exposed some of them, because some of them look great on the surface. High house prices. Wow, my house is worth so much. So just a simple formula. My house, say, is worth £500,000. I want to buy a house that's £750,000. Both of them go up by 50%. I am now going to have to find 50% more to buy the other house, because that's gone up 50% as well. And 50% of £750,000 is more than 50% of £500,000. So the longer your house goes up for, the more you're going to have to pay out of your own pocket on top of what you get back, because the gap is going to get further and further away forever. So the first thing, the fruit of these dreadful policies, which are all totally avoidable and totally, you know, man-made, human-created policies, which would stop tomorrow if we made them do it, are high house prices, low savings returns for pensions. I mean, Ed Miliband, Nick Clegg got rid of it last week, thank goodness, but Ed Miliband still wants the mansion tax. The original mansion tax was going to be 1% of £2 million, 20,000 a year. I do not know any pensioners who are these people that bought the houses for about £10,000 in the 70s, now worth £2 million. They don't get £20,000 a year. So how on earth would they have to pay £20,000 a year on something which they've got, which they didn't spend the money on? It just happens to be inflated because of government policies, which I've already said created this house price bubble. So we've got high house prices, low savings return, massive energy prices. What did they say this week on the news? That our gas prices have gone up by 23% in a year. Our wages have gone up 1.2% or 1.5%, and gas prices have gone up. Essentials you have to have. There is what you call an optimum temperature for human beings to live at. If you turn that temperature down by 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 degrees, their immune system and their metabolism will slow down and gradually get worse and worse until they get hypothermia, they become ill, they die. They are killing thousands of people every winter. The figures are in. We know how many people have died. So they are putting essentials, heating and lighting, at a premium. Who would do that except an absolute scoundrel? You know, these are the policies, not even of the Nazis. The Nazis wouldn't have done that, because at least the Nazis, you know, they were killing their enemies and bribing the people of Germany to allow it to happen. But I don't think they would have actually put up the energy prices as well. These are unheard of things. I've never come across them before.
I think we're into a massive spider's web that's all interlinked here, David.
Absolutely.
And it's always fascinating talking to you about this. And we could go on about this and go into lots of different areas. But as you're saying, just sticking to the simple basic points, really, who benefits? Who's benefiting from what our so-called government is doing? It's certainly not the population of the country. And who's benefiting from these things worldwide? We're finding country after country is being collapsed. The people are being forced into poverty and being slow killed, basically. And these are all factual things that are happening. So is there anything you'd just like to say before we go to another break?
Yeah, well, it's follow the money and who benefits. So who's benefiting from this? The minority. If you have a business with 2 or 3 plus properties, and in many cases thousands of properties, of course you'll do very well. If you're borrowing at 0.5% and doing massive transactions, you'll do very well. So basically the businesses who profit, it's called corporate fascism. It's not called democracy. If a company is making the laws, it's corporatism, and that is the definition basically of fascism. That it's not the people under communism who own everything under the state, it's the businesses who own everything they're privatising the national health. Now they privatise things which cannot be privatised, i.e. public services, because you can only have one gas supply, one water supply, and one electricity supply, because that's all you're getting up your pipes and your wires. Those are the only things you can do. And you've only got one railway line, so it doesn't make any sense to compete over those things. They should be not for profit, because you're already adding in a profit by privatising them when you shouldn't have it, because these are all essentials and there's less left for the economy. So the people who are profiting, the tiny minority who own these businesses, and they're doing well. And the politicians, you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. You've got a small group of environmental activists who genuinely believe the planet's under threat. So they are getting their power. They're getting to reduce the population and to stop people from moving around and using resources under the. I think
they're being co-opted for an agenda that they don't even understand. I think this is really what it's about. It's very clever that these people are being useful idiots for an agenda that they are simply not aware of yet.
Yeah. The whole point is, if people knew this was going to happen, if somebody had said and been honest. Now, Lord Stern, in the Stern report, actually said something which was absolutely true, absolutely honest, and nobody took any notice. We are going to have power cuts under the EU green targets, because it's impossible to replace solid baseload with a constant supply of power with wind and solar, because they're only on a fraction of the time. They cost a fortune. So, if you get rid of coal and you get rid of all the other things that bring in wind and solar, of course you're going to have power cuts. What else is going to happen? So if you'd said to people, we are going to put up energy prices so much that 3,000 old people are going to die every year, but it's good for the planet, they'd be lynching mobs. So they don't say it. So who says it? I say it. I am saying that your government left out in their party political broadcasts that these green taxes will kill 3,000 to 4,000 old and poor people a year, and they will continue to do more because the energy prices are on an escalator. They're going to go up more and more every year. So all these restrictions and the overcrowding. Now, where I live is in a very sort of, you've been here, it's a nice peaceful suburb. They're putting up high rises now. There was a council estate round the corner with 650 occupants. They're knocking it down and they're replacing it with high rises, 30 floors, 3,000 occupants.
Yes, this is part of the sustainable development housing of hive cities and hotspots, where they're going to concentrate masses of population for constant and total surveillance. And that is actually in the documentation for Architects for Sustainable Development. They're actually stating that they will have constant surveillance and overlook, and we can go into that in great detail in the future, but as we already have done on this show, because what they're doing is they're hiving the cities now. There's going to be 1,000 new flats around here, which will same thing as what's happening where you are. It's going to collapse the house prices. So the house prices here are through the roof at the moment, and those house prices are going to be collapsed by this sustainable development hive housing, because the whole of the infrastructure will be under pressure. So what they're doing is they're going to collapse property prices so the council can compulsory purchase property and then build more flats.
Yeah, so it's all very well. See, there are always two cures to a problem. It's cost-benefit analysis. Now, if your problem is high house prices, you are supposed to fix it by changing the economy to allow people again to stick to their 3 times annual income, not to crash it by doing what they've done and forcing people out of houses into high-rise prices flats and ruining their quality of life, because all the crime and everything else in the 1960s from building these high-rise estates when they cleared the slums and changed the flat slums to the high slums. So all they were doing was moving the problem from the ground to the sky, and nothing changed, because if you're going to have slums, it doesn't matter how you arrange them. I say this about various things in the economy. Moving the same money around never creates anything. All it does is take the money away from one person and give it to the others, and we'll continue to do it until people understand this conveyor belt. It's like skimming your bank account, where they're taking 2% of everything in everyone's bank accounts off the top for themselves for inflation. And they did that with LIBOR, and they did that with, I've just mentioned the Hillsborough inquiry. That why did it take the police, where they've now proved that the top police ordered them to change their witness statements, 23 years to be exposed for Hillsborough?
Well, it was so that those officers could take their pensions and slip out of the way.
Yeah, and who allowed them? The government. Always comes back to the same people, the same organisation. It doesn't matter how many examples. I could probably find more and more examples, but it's the principle that counts. If people understand the principle and they get it, you know, they watch this programme and say, my God, I've been had. There's nothing more powerful than somebody that's been cheated, because they have been trusting these people for years and years. You know, it's almost like Jimmy Savile. You know, you've watched him all these years and then he's let you down. I mean, you know, I can mention him because he's dead now, so I can't slander him or anything. But it's that sort of scenario that you've been trusting somebody for all these years. It's like a babysitter, and suddenly they've let you down. And what do? You don't keep them on like you keep the banks on and don't change their policies. You change everything. You have a clear out. I mean, they're talking about resets on the internet. They've been talking about it probably for about 10 years, and it never happens. And it doesn't happen because they're talking about wishful thinking, but a global reset would be clearing all this nonsense, all this false debt, all this quantitative easing, getting rid of all the chaff out of the economy, starting from scratch and doing what Iceland did, except for not paying back their debts, which was very naughty. I'd never condone that. But Iceland left the system. They got out of the banking system. They stopped doing all the things that ruined it, and they've bounced back, and their economy is doing quite well now because they're now no longer within the huge cabal of the world system. And every country could do it if they want to. You know, one person can be out of step. We can leave the EU. We don't have to do anything that other people tell us to, because we are ultimately free. And if the people know enough, they will free themselves. It's all about knowledge and information.
It is all about knowledge and information, David. Always fascinating to talk to you. And that's great. Thanks for your 6 points and the summary then. We'll speak to you very soon.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks for joining us on Windows on the World. Remember, keep watching those, watching us, watching Windows on the World. We'll see you soon.